good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel, The Hidden Cost of Poor Data Quality in AI, How Errors, Biases, and Inconsistencies Undermine Accuracy, Scalability, and ROI. Brought to you by our friends at Fivetran, Informatica, Revify, SAP, and Snowplow. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI ecosystem for enterprise leaders. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to explore one of the most critical and often overlooked drivers of AI success, data quality. Errors, biases, and inconsistencies in data quality can quietly derail even the most advanced AI initiatives, undermining accuracy, scalability, and ROI. In this session, we'll unpack how poor data quality impacts model performance and decision-making, and we'll share practical strategies to build stronger data governance frameworks that ensure reliability and consistency. Our panel will also dive into actionable methods for identifying hidden data pitfalls, improving input quality, and optimizing your organization's return on AI investments. By mastering these principles, you'll be equipped to enhance the precision, trustworthiness, and business impact of your AI initiatives. We're honored to hear from a distinguished panel of experts today. Girish Bhatt, SVP of Revify, John Malloy, Senior Technical Account Manager at Snowplow, Nate Rain, Data Governance, Quality, and Privacy Specialist at Informatica, and Kelly Kohleffel, Senior Global Director of Partner Sales Engineering at Fivetran. Before we begin, a few housekeeping matters. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features in the right sidebar. We'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn more about the importance of data quality in your AI journey, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. Welcome, guys. So we'll kick things off with some quick intros, and we'll just start in the order that you appear on my screen. So Girish, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Hey, Brian and the data science team, thank you so much for having us. I'm Girish Bhatt. I'm with a company called Revify. Revify is a data infrastructure software startup. At Revify, we offer a SaaS platform and an AI agent for data spend optimization, data operations, and automated data quality. The origin of Revify is kind of pertinent here because both my co-founders who co-founded a company called ThoughtSpot and had spent quite a bit of time at Meta, AWS, and Google research, spent time not only researching data quality issues, but also building products. Particularly at Meta, when my CTO was there, he realized that roughly about 40% of the time of the data team was spent in reactive detection, root causing, firefighting data issues. So he built a large-scale data quality platform at Meta, which scaled to then 1 million data tables and roughly about 100,000 data pipelines. This was at Meta. So that was one of the catalysts that led to forming Revify. And here we are now, 4 years later. Glad to be part of this panel and looking forward to participating in this very important topic.
Excellent. Welcome, Girish. Nate?
Yeah, Nate Rain. I've been at Informatica for 4 years. Prior to Informatica, was a customer of Informatica's for roughly about 10 years. So know the platform well, know the importance of good quality data, not just in AI and really any data initiative. And as a customer, you know, have a lot of stories to tell about running projects with poor data quality. So hopefully we'll get into some of that today and be able to share some of my learning experiences.
Absolutely. Welcome, Nate. Kelly?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what happened. My speaker just switched off of my headphones there, so I'm going a different direction there. Hey, everybody. Kelly Kohleffel. I look after the global partner sales engineering team at Fivetran. I've been been in tech for a long time. Companies like Oracle, Hortonworks, HashMap, NTT Data, worked on a lot of data problems and lately a lot of AI challenges over the last few years. This topic, for me, really, really interesting. If you follow me at all, I am over the top about the possibilities of AI. I think there are literally thousands of use cases across every industry that we can take advantage of. But that data foundation has to be right, and data quality is a big part of that. So looking forward to the discussion today and all the different perspectives. And I hope to learn quite a bit as well.
Thanks, Kelly. John.
Hey, everybody. My name is John Malloy. I'm a senior technical account manager here with Snowplow. Prior to Snowplow, I spent several years working through AI and machine learning initiatives, mostly in the US healthcare space, built on top of a lot of crummy data sets with lots of problems. And so then I moved over to Snowplow, where we help generate, curate, and activate behavioral data that's been well validated and hopefully helps avoid some of the problems that can arise when you're trying to build machine learning and AI on top of bad data. So I've been on both sides of the coin and happy to be here with the panel and share some insights.
Great, excellent intros. And great to meet all of you and see some of you again. So we'll jump right into our discussion. So today we're talking about data quality. A lot of organizations that focus heavily on AI models are underestimating the importance of data quality to making the whole thing work. So why is data quality so important to AI success? So let's start with Nate on this one.
I immediately thought of the MIT study, right? Where we're probably all tired of seeing it and hearing it, right? But the study was 90% of AI models are failing. There's another good statistic that says data scientists typically spend 60 to 80% of their time preparing data. And that's probably not what they were hired for, but that's where they're spending the time, right? Because data is just not in the state that it needs to be in. Amit Walia is our CEO at Informatica. He coined a term, everyone's ready for AI except your data, right? So it's true, right? I see the smiles already from my peers here. It's the topic, right? And it's what we need to do to make sure our AI is ready.
Fair points, Nate. Kelly?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that the point that that was made regarding AI and the data not being ready. I mean, I think that's what we've been struggling with for at least as long as I've been doing this across all workloads, all data workloads, right? So that ability to get data right so that if I'm running a BI report, I can fully trust it. And now today, I've got really interesting information coming out of a model in an agentic flow or whatever it may be. I want to be able to trust that equally as well. But the fundamental problem of that data foundation is still there. And I think that for me, maybe talk about this a little bit later on. I heard the VP of Architecture, Data, and AI at a conference recently. Her name is Wei Manfredi, talking about these different tiers of data quality and how that relates to how we think about AI applications delivering those. And her fundamental point was, you don't necessarily have to have 100% perfect data quality for every single AI application within your organization. The closer I get to, financial decision making, governance decision making, risk decision, yes, you do. But she proposed 3 tiers that could maybe range from somewhere in the 65-70% of data quality on up, higher, obviously. And I've thought about it. It caused me to think, but I've also thought about it a little bit differently, where it just seems to me that trying to get our entire data estate perfect, every single data set, in large enterprises, you're talking thousands of data sets. Quite frankly, it will never happen. It's not going to happen. You might as well just not even think that is a thing, because it won't happen. But for AI, I don't have to have all 1,000 of my data sets to get value out of a focused AI application. And that's kind of where I am today, working with partners, working with customers, is let's get focused not only around the data, but around the context, and let's go solve something. And I can mitigate a little bit this idea that I got to have this perfect data quality across my entire organization.
Yeah, great points, Kelly. Perfect is the enemy of good. So great points there. John?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, when I tend to think of why data quality is important, I think about situations where I don't have it and the two bad choices that leaves with you. I really kind of relate to Nate's point about how if you have bad data, you're going to spend a lot of time cleaning it. That's going to be a lot of wasted cycles on people that would rather be creating more value and doing more interesting things than just cleaning it up, which can be a laborious manual task. And so that's one choice that you have in terms of when you have bad data, you either spend the time to clean it, or the other potential bad choice is maybe, depending on how complicated your machine learning or AI flow is and how interpretable it is, sometimes you are just going to be taking results out of a pipeline that you've set up, and there are biases or mistakes in your data that you don't understand, or it's hard to interpret that that's happening. And then you start making real business decisions based on these outputs. And it can be really hard for somebody to catch that something is going wonky until you're pretty far down the line, and then you ended up in a bad state. So making sure that you have data that is suited to the task that you need and is going to be at least clean enough to get you to some actionable insights is super critical.
Yeah, great points. Girish?
Yeah, I think I'm echoing what my fellow panelists are saying. In this AI gold rush that we are in, I think the focus has been on the foundational or frontier models and applications. It's a middle tiers where we are, I think, which is where people are a little bit, okay, hey, the models will do everything right, and then the app, let's build native apps. And what happens to the $5 trillion economy between those two, right? I think that's where we are really. I mean, to echo what the panelists said, I think the challenge or the problem space is much vaster than just data quality. It's about AI-ready data. There is governance, there's quality, and more importantly, I think both Kelly and Nate and even John talked about it, it's the context. You don't need perfect data for every use case. But I think the challenge with AI has become is, if you have a BI tool, it's great. It may show you wrong data, and the damage done may be perhaps a little bit restrictive. And if the fundamental or a frontier model is heavily biased towards that, it could be used by thousands of people every second or millions of people in a month. It acts as an amplifier of bad data. I think that's why it's important that we not only have good or great data quality for the use case with the right context, but also we have that we have that governed appropriately as well.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. Go ahead,
I was just going to mention to Girish's point that I think like 3 years ago when all this started, you kind of got almost brainwashed into this. Okay, foundational model, answer any question. I need to apply that to my enterprise, and the level of specificity and granularity that we need in the enterprise and in a business, forget enterprise, small, medium, in a business is not everything that a foundational model is trained on. It's actually more important to have, to Girish's point, specific context when it relates to the data, and specific context in quite a few other dimensions when you're talking AI working with these models. I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more. So there's this, traditional data quality aspect, absolutely 100%, but then there's this flow down as well into the additional context that a model needs to work on to actually give you good answers, good recommendations, and good analysis within an organization. So it's just a fascinating place to be right now to say, hey, I think this data quality thing has kind of expanded into data and context quality, and how does all that fit together?
Yeah, that's a great point, Kelly, and tees up our next question very nicely. And you were going to be first in line for that one anyway. So the most common issues that you're seeing, what are the most common issues, and especially as it relates to the enterprise that may be different from the needs of a consumer with respect to data quality or with respect to the context and the quality of the context? What are some of the major issues that you see popping up that are impacting AI performance?
Yeah, for me, Brian, the thing I've been running into a lot, and I've been personally building AI applications for about 2.5 years now. Uh, and really started with a RAG-based approach. Let's load everything I've got in my data set that I'm interested in immediately. And lately, as I've been experimenting with MCP servers and the challenge of not only dealing with good sized data sets, but also multiple tools within a single MCP server, then you go, wait, I want to traverse multiple, in my case, data applications. So think, Fivetran, DBT, Snowflake, Databricks, Google Cloud, Census. I want to traverse multiples with an MCP server, call it a pipeline health review. And you go, okay, I've got all this data I got to load up. I got all these tools I got to load up. How do I do that and not blow out my context window with all of this great data right in the beginning? And I can never even get to an answer. And I think that's the thing that a lot of us right now, like, I think I'm on my 5th iteration of this at the moment of, shrinking that down, more specialized, more optimized code execution at the MCP server level to try to provide the right data and the right overall context, but still have plenty of room for an answer based off of that good context. But to me, that is the biggest challenge right now, is this context window that we're having to operate in.
Yeah, great point, Kelly. John?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the single biggest data quality issue that I run into on a daily basis, it comes down to what data do I not have, and data that I might not have that I think I do. So kind of as an example, let's say I'm collecting data about my users, and I think, okay, great, I've got all this great data about my users and it's a representative sample. But what if I suddenly have a set of users that have opted out of data collection and now I'm not collecting data about those users? If I don't understand the sources of where my data is coming from and the entire flow downstream from that source through my models, I now am potentially applying these, AI workflows or these machine learning techniques to data and assuming that it can correctly identify, whatever I'm trying to do about my entire user base when I actually don't have the data to do that. And the only way that you can really be certain that you're not falling into that trap is to understand where your data is coming from and understand the entire domain of what it is and is not appropriate to tackle. So I find that that's a tricky problem because it's sort of an unknown unknown when looking at the data you have, but having a full holistic sense of the ecosystem in which you're capturing that data is kind of the way around that singular problem.
Great point, John. Girish?
Right. Yeah, I think John started this. He referred to this. I'll give a little bit of a nostalgic tour, I guess. About 10 years ago, I was at Splunk. We were all into unsupervised machine learning, aka now AI with artificial neural networks then. So that this whole concept of known unknowns and unknown unknowns emerged, right? Meaning, if I look at fast forwarding it to data management practices and the data community, we like to think of data quality still in the classic fashion of, okay, what are the pillars? There's 3 pillars, 5 pillars, 7 pillars, whatever the number of pillars. Those are all great. Those are all, what we classify as known unknowns, right? Meaning, okay, what these are supposed to be. You can kind of measure them either manually or automated ways. But I think with AI, the problem gets exacerbated with this unknown unknowns. For example, we talked previously, right, about dashboards flagging and everything is green. It may be a kind of a healthy data pipeline, ETL job, whatever, or reverse ETL, whatever it is. It runs successfully. It's green, and everyone is happy about that. But that's what is the silent data failure, right? So this is something that we are seeing in some scenarios where the data is not right. And then the concept, I know we'll talk about that a little bit more, the concept of data timeliness it's a lot of regulated industry. The data is a bit, let's say, there's a lot of legacy, and there's a little bit of dated data, if that makes sense. And that's part of the challenges now. And when we look at it, yeah, the silent data failures or the data timeliness and also the data bias are the things that we are seeing that are surfacing because of poor data quality in AI.
Yeah, great points, Girish. Nate?
Yeah, look, I echo what they all said, right? And Girish, I think you mentioned context at the beginning. I'm so glad you said that. It was something that I was going to bring up at some point. I was kind of thinking I'll put it in my back pocket and I'll save it for the end, and it'll be this big moment, right? But you stole it right off the bat.
Sorry.
And it comes from the days that I started reading this book.
Yeah.
And they actually say all the data quality dimensions that we're kind of hinting around, those are the common problems still to this day, right? It's the missing values, they're outdated values, to your point, inconsistent formats across sources, duplicate records, those subtle biases. All of those really are pointing to context, which is what Dama pointed out 20 years ago, right? So it's still relevant. It's still relevant. Love that. That's my Bible. The other thing is, I read that study about a data scientist preparing data, 60% of their time spent actually doing data quality. And I think, where are they fixing it? Right. And John, you mentioned going back to the source, data has a life cycle. And if I'm fixing it where I'm potentially going to use it and I'm not addressing it back at the original sources and engaging with the people that are inputting the data, aren't we going to have the same problem tomorrow? So,
Nate,
people, process, technology, right? It's focusing on the people in the process, which is so hard, but that's the part that we've got to take that. We have to take that on. That's what we have to take on. And don't be afraid of it. We got to go after the people and process.
Nate, I was I was going to mention to you, to your point there on trusting the source. I was at another event. I think it was a CDAO event recently, and I was listening to a breakout session, and the speaker said, "Hey, how many of the people in this room trust their Salesforce data?" I mean, this is Salesforce should be a system of record. I probably shouldn't even mention Salesforce. Let's say, how many people trust their CRM data? Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever. To your point, the overwhelming majority of hands went up. I bet it was 75% in the room said, no, we do not trust that. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but it goes back to your point on the source side of things. Most of the time we have a limited control over way downstream, right? And it's just a challenge for us. It's been there, it's staying there. It's going to be tough to overcome that one, but it's really interesting to see that it has not improved a whole lot over the past couple of decades.
So we've got some great questions in the chat and that speak to some of these points. And one I'll show you on stage here is this is from Salvatore, who's a consultant. What data standards are you using to curate your data, or are you developing your own standards? And I think you guys have hit on some very important points about what organizations should be looking out for with respect to their data quality. But then when you think about what that ideal future state looks like, of when can you say that we have data that we can trust and data that we can feed into our models? When do you know that you're at that point? What standards are you developing to determine whether your data can be trusted in the context of AI? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
One thing that I'll say, just because it's sort of a decision that we at Snowplow sort of enforce up front, is that coming up with a data governance strategy ahead of time before you actually start collecting data and bringing it to bear on problems is really important. And the decision to do that is not free, right? That takes time. And a lot of time it's very hard for somebody who's approaching a net new problem to totally have their head all the way around the problem and understand, if I want to answer this question, these are the data pieces I'm going to need to solve it. That can be a big ask, and it can delay the amount of time it takes to get your first kind of POC in place and sort of start iterating. That can delay out those timelines and make it sort of an unattractive proposition. But the alternative is that you don't set up that data governance feedback loop, and you just start collecting data, and you run into these problems when you're already, have a fair amount of sunk costs baked into your process, and now you get, in a bad way. So I would argue that investing and committing to data governance upfront, even though it's not a sexy thing to do, is really a very important thing.
Yeah, one thing I would add is there's constant blurring of categories, technologies, and products, right? Like to John's point, yeah, absolutely, data governance is critical. And now this other Hydra is rearing itself called AI governance, right? Which is, does AI governance include subsume data governance? Does it include security governance? And it's one of those things, right? But absolutely, you got to have the integrity, not only in the models but also in the quality with the right context. But I think there are some interesting initiatives. Maybe we'll get into that, Brian. It's around NIST frameworks and things like that for a risk management, which also, I mean, fundamentally, it's about a governance approach to things, right? So I think adopting that is critical. Perhaps 3 years ago, we might have kind of looked at governance slightly different as a legacy, a way of doing things. But I think with the AI now, the problem continues to, I won't say worse, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but I think it's the importance of AI, particularly from hallucination, bias, and potential quality and data readiness. It's at the forefront for us.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Girish, I mean, we've got a pretty good amount of technical and business catalogs out there today. I have a hard time keeping up. I'm guessing there's probably going to be a flurry of AI catalogs that are cropping up. There may already be some out there I'm just not aware of. So tough to keep up with, agree.
Yeah, and one of the questions we had in the chat relates to what you guys were just talking about with respect to governance. So it's important and will take time. It's often not considered urgent, and sometimes it's quite difficult to promote and get strong buy-in from senior stakeholders. Anyone have any success stories to share or best practices that you can share about getting buy-in? And this really relates to, Nate, your point earlier about the people and the processes over the technology. The technology is certainly there, but then what does it take to actually get buy-in from executives to invest financially, or to invest in terms of the bandwidth of your team in data governance over other things that might seem flashier, more exciting, like they would maybe move the needle more from a business standpoint. But how do you get that buy-in with respect to governance? Anyone want to weigh in there?
I have a few success stories. I'll tell you, I have some success stories, but I have a lot more trenches or valleys, I guess, right? So I like to highlight the successes that I've had, so I'll do that here. I had been wanting to start a data governance program for a number of years. As the head of BI in an enterprise data warehouse, we would publish a report. Someone in the organization would say, "My number doesn't match your number." It happened every time. We worked 6 months on those reports, right? Working with someone in the business. So that was a little bit of the trench, but so we finally convinced our organization, okay, yes, go do this data governance thing, Nate. So the thing that worked was a use case. Find a use case that's going to add value to your organization. Right? Don't boil the ocean, right? I'm like using all the things that you've probably all heard, right? Boiling the ocean is not going to provide value. It's going to just add to confusion. So find a use case, go after that use case. What we decided to do was master a specific domain in our organization that had a lot of problems. And I went to the original source system and I said, I think you've got good data around this domain. And I want to use some of that data. Can I profile it? Just by asking that, right? She's like, oh man, I know we've got good data. Yes, go profile it. So we profile it. We come back about 2 weeks later. She's got her whole leadership team there. She's so confident that the data is going to be good, right? And she's going to be able to show off a little bit. And I show her the results. They're not as good as she thought they were. She never had a way of measuring it before, right? So it wasn't her fault, right? But she said, well, I think some of these issues are probably before I got here. So then I showed her timestamps, right? Oh, this was entered yesterday, this error. So I guess where I'm going to, my answer to this question, Brian, is it's the profiling and data quality is a hook for data governance, right? If you can show your organization how bad it is, right? It's like, this is the hook, but you got to figure out where is the pain for the organization and get people at that C-suite level to say, yeah, I agree with it. It's worth it to go spend time on that data set or that domain, because that's going to add value. And why? What value would that add for us to understand it? Long answer.
No, and just to put some meat on the bones here, I think, a lot of when we're talking about the importance of AI and data quality to AI and governance, it's maybe apparent to us how the many different problems that could arise in that regard. But can you guys give some specifics of things that you've seen or are seeing in terms of how data quality can really lead to errors and biases, and affect the fairness, reliability, the decision-making impact of AI models? Girish, why don't you start on that?
Yeah, so I wanted to quickly add something to the previous question around governance, if that's okay. Since it is an audience question, I would strongly encourage people, if you want to look at things from a neutrality perspective, to look at the NIST risk management framework. It has really like 4 concepts there. There's things around govern, map, aka visualize, measure the whatever it is, both the data and AI constructs, and also manage that. That will help you establish a good framework, which is not necessarily tied to a particular data platform or a data solution provider. I think that's critical. So I would encourage definitely things around that. Okay. So I think the question you had, Brian, was around errors and biases in training data, right?
Sure.
I briefly touched on that. I'll just stay loyal to my previous answer. AI has a compounding effect. That is, if there is bad data, it just continues to make it worse. So what our approach always is, we look at first of all, we automate things around data quality and understanding. Do we have the right data? Is it relevant to the use cases? And do we have that? What's the freshness of the data? Is the lineage right? We do all those things automatically to the extent possible. And that's how we are doing that in a proactive and automatic way. And I wish I had the answer to say, hey, we can eliminate all these things outside testing and decision making and right governance. Yes, you need right governance. One of the things that we are encouraging, we are doing internally and encouraging our customers to also do is make sure that it's a collaborative approach. I think Nate had mentioned this earlier. It's in siloed concepts. Things just don't work anymore. AI is one of those things where you need to do things in a centralized, perhaps having an AI council and working with them so that issues around biases and others are addressed at the organization wide level, not just at the narrow solution mechanism. So yeah, you got to do the basics right. Make sure you understand the use case, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and have complete visibility and observability into that.
Yeah, great points. John, you want to take that as well?
Yeah, I sort of already touched a little bit on the way that if you don't understand your data holistically, how those biases can invisibly corrupt your results. And I definitely think that's true. You asked for a specific example, so I'll kind of give one without getting too in the weeds. One of the customers that I work with had a situation where they were trying to study how engaged users were with some of the content that they were providing. And they did some analysis, they ran some AI related pipelines, and the results were, oh my goodness, these people are so engaged with your content. It's the first thing they read when they get out of bed in the morning, and it's the last thing they look at night. And then we went to kind of apply those results to sort of some future content rollouts, and the content was falling off a cliff and performing terribly compared to the previous results. And it's probably not too hard to understand why. All of the data that we trained those initial models on were from users that had self-selected to have their data captured, right? So that represented a small fraction of their users that were willing to be measured and engaged, and they had to proactively decide that, yes, I want my data to be included in this study, which, is not representative of the general populace in any capacity. And so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and understand, look, if you're just looking at this table full of data in a warehouse and trying to, build AI on top of it, you would have no way of knowing that this is only a small subset of the data that, should actually be represented here. And you need to adjust your models to account for that. And so those types of things are happening all the time, maybe not in cases that are that extreme or that obvious or easy to paint a picture of, but you want to make sure that you're proactively thinking about that basically all the time, because if you're not, you're going to be making decisions based on unstable ground.
Yep, great points. Nate?
Biases and mistakes in the data. I mean, we could go back to our previous conversation of having a data governance framework so that we have terms defined, right? And you don't have to define everything, right? To Kelly's point earlier, you need to focus on, I think about the Pareto principle. Probably only 20% of your organization's data is what's adding value, right? So focus on the 20. Focus on the 20, get definitions, because the biases and mistakes in the data directly shape the fairness and reliability. So if we're defining terms that lead to confusion in the organization, we're going to have a better shot at being able to do data profiling and data quality on it.
Great points. Kelly?
Yeah, no, great points from everyone. I for this, I was thinking about how are folks using AI today. I've got this foundational model that we really don't control. That's kind of commoditized. And honestly, any foundational model will work probably for the vast majority of use cases. But then you dig down into system instructions, examples, specific tools that, let's say, an agent would use. I'm starting to even not like the word agent anymore. That probably doesn't sound right. We're talking about AI, but I like the way, for instance, Anthropic is calling some of their agent-based capabilities like Claude skills, Claude projects. It makes it more humanized. And I'm starting to like that approach, because I've been talking agents for about 2 years now, and I'm thinking, man, I think I'm just confusing everybody. But tools, semantic views, search capabilities, custom functions, maybe the skill or the agent can use. Memories coming into play in a big way, the chat history, user instructions, obviously data context. All of these things to me are playing in. And how do I want that response to look? You can control a lot of those things. When we're talking about biases and how we want these answers either to be presented or thought about or analyzed, you don't really control the foundational model at all, and the data sets that's trained on. But I'm kind of to the point now where I don't know if I really even care about that anymore. is the model to me and how it's trained less relevant if I'm doing all those other things really well? And kind of to Nate's point around a specific use case that has very specific data, very specific instructions. I built called it a care pathway agent a while back, and was thinking about if I can get memory built into that, like which clinicians prefer certain types of alerts, are there historical patterns for specific patient populations, that again, this notion of memory, which now, for instance, I can turn on memory in Claude. I'm a big Claude user, if you can't tell. I can turn on memory in Claude to remember, provide context for anything that I'm doing. And we can start thinking about that for enterprise applications as well. It gets really interesting when that actually becomes that can hopefully override some of the bias that may exist in a large training data set. That immediate context, like what just happened, what were those immediate interactions? I don't disagree with John either, though. I mean, you could certainly get off track and get off the rails on that, but just I think the whole way we think about this today, there's just this multi-dimensional thing that every piece of the puzzle can have an influence and ultimately lead to a bias type of effect. And so there's got to be really good alignment across the board.
Yeah, you mentioned a number of tools there, and we've got some good questions in the chat. So one question from Abdul is, if humans can assess data quality, why can't we get AI to do the same before it jumps to conclusions? So that's one question. And relatedly, Chang asked, can you please suggest some good third-party platforms where we could validate our vendor customer data, like banking, tax, effectively, et cetera? And I loop those together because I think as we talk about data quality and data governance and data and AI observability, platforms are a central part of that conversation. Is how do, especially enterprise organizations, piece together their stack so that they have the right tools in order to ensure that they have the data quality that they need, data governance, particularly in an automated or rule-based fashion, and that there's observability into the performance of those models and into the quality of their data. So I'll open those couple of questions up. What are you guys' thoughts on what that stack looks like? Any specific recommendations of platforms or tools that you've seen be particularly effective?
I can jump in. So I'll try to weave in on the data quality observability. I'm partly guilty and maybe responsible also for this thing called data observability. I started on that journey about 4 or 5 years ago, and fast forward, and it evolved. Initially, it was more than static monitoring, right? There was inherent confusion as to what the heck is data observability. Is it, if I have all my monitoring and my high-level management tools, why do I need this? But the industry it's evolved today to the point where it looks at more broadly your data infrastructure, our data ecosystem play. What's happening not only from your data quality perspective, what are you looking at it from a spend or a cost perspective? What are you looking from underlying pipeline perspective? And the journey continues, right? And what kind of data do you have? It's a continuum, in other words. So what we are seeing is it's no longer about, I think Nate started off earlier, right? I mean, also he gave an example where the data, there was a disconnect between what he was doing and what people were sharing with him. It's because of the lack of collaboration that continues even today in many companies, small or large, right? So for me, our approach is that why not have I don't want to use the term unified. Why not have a single approach where, because to manage quality, you need to know what's the underlying data ecosystem, what kind of data is it, what's the volume of it, is it static, is it structured, all these things. Then it's dependence on the underlying data ecosystem. How much are you spending? How are the queries performing? It becomes more than a yin and yang. So you need to be at the nexus of performance, quality, observability, and spend is what we are seeing. So our approach is there is a generational shift happening in terms of products and solutions also, some of it from my colleagues also in the industry as well as from Revify. And it's you no longer need to do the same thing you've been doing 30 years ago. That's why I think with modern software techniques and development practices, you can do a lot more with a relatively modern tool today. Pick any vendor who's on this panel, right? You'll get a lot more today.
Yeah, great points. Other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I am a platform guy. I like the way that you can take like, let me put my data and AI in a single platform. Obviously, everything has to get there, but I start solving for a lot of the security and governance concerns that I've had, at least for that data that's sitting in whatever that platform is in, and the AI that's operating off of that data. When we were talking a little bit about observability, it seems to me that there's getting to be some really interesting options around observability now that we didn't have in the past. And again, I talked a little bit about MCP earlier. Traditional product walls, hey, here's Fivetran, here's Snowflake, here's DBT, here's Census, here's my source application, here's my downstream app. If I can have some, to Grish's point, if I can have some observability across that entire end-to-end from where source to ultimate outcome is, or action is, that starts to get really interesting. And can I potentially go, hey, check the health of my end-to-end flow from source to outcome in a very simple natural language request or prompt? Say, hey, check my higher education student retention pipeline. And all of that is executed across from an observability standpoint. Said, stage 1, check, that looks good. Stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. That is becoming more and more of a possibility today, where you've got this almost, pick your UI that, you can execute MCP from, and let that be your UI into this overall observability of what's going on end to end. So to me, that's getting really interesting right now. I think about it as an option. I don't think it's going to replace anything anytime soon, but certainly something I'm sure everybody, or a lot of folks anyway, are experimenting with right now to see how they can apply that effectively within their organization.
I have a lot of thoughts that are kind of stirring. I think I can tell John's brain's working too. So I don't know how let me just throw a couple of things out here. So I remember being asked one time in an interview how I would rate my SQL skills. And I rated myself an 8, and I wasn't that good. I knew I wasn't that good, but I thought I gotta answer this question to get the job. But I knew enough to doubt myself, right? I knew enough to not take 10. I knew SQL was a heck of a lot more complicated. That's what I want out of my AI model. I want my AI model to know enough to doubt itself. AI is not going to do that. That's where the human comes in. The future isn't more data. I mean, it is, right? But it's smarter data. That's where we keep going back to the definitions, right? And I'm not going to get back on that bandwagon, but so automation is necessary for scale. If you've ever done data quality the hard way, you appreciate these platforms, right? And we're all competitive platforms here, so we probably don't want to mention one, right? But the fact of the matter is, if you've done DQ the hard way, if you've done profiling the hard way, you appreciate, oh man, this automation is going to help me a ton. You need that, but you also need the human context, which is what we're kind of all hinting at. Well, not hinting, we're hitting it straight on, which I'm glad we are, right? That's the human context and the judgment are essential in AI models, period.
Yeah, and Nate, I think you helped me kind of organize my thoughts a little bit there, because this is a broad question. I was definitely swirling around, but I think the idea of human context is probably the most important point here, in the sense that when you're thinking about why can't AI do data quality, AI can absolutely help with the things that it would take a data scientist a lot of time to do. Find me the nulls, find me the Unicode characters that are hiding in my rows that are bad. All of that is definitely a good thing. But what's more important is having fundamental agreement across your organization about the definitions of what things are. So if I have viewed a product 8 times, what does that mean? How did I actually interact and engage with that product on an e-commerce site? And my 8 times might not be the same as the 8 times of interaction with another organization, because they might define what that interaction is a little bit differently. And that's okay. Like, organizations don't need to agree with each other, but you do need to make sure that your entire data estate is consistent. And if you're going to be using AI to go across that data and make higher level decisions, the AI also needs to agree with the way that you've defined certain things. So there's got to be some level of socialization of your data and clear definitions. And that's why, I keep coming back to data governance point, partially because I'm obsessed and I've seen, good outcomes from it. But if you don't have that data governance layer and those consistent definitions, everybody's not singing slightly different songs, and it doesn't come together, and you might not notice those slight differences until something is too late, and then you have to do a big refactor to bring everybody back together.
Yeah, those are great points, and that goes nicely into one of our other questions that we had here, which is how do organizations measure and enforce data quality standards across different teams and departments? So you addressed there, John, that different departments have different definitions for the same thing, or maybe are measuring things or measuring them differently. So how do you, from a process and people standpoint, or perhaps through some kind of automation with using technology, how do you enforce those standards across various different units within the same company? Nate, you want to take that one for starters?
Yeah, man, my brain's not thinking. I was just, as you were talking, Brian, I was immediately thinking about, there's this quote, I don't know who said it, but it's a text without a context is a pretext to basically anything you want. Right. And I don't know I don't know who said the quote, and I'm not sure I'm even getting the quote right. So I'm glad you're laughing at me, because but that's where it is, right? That's what we're all saying. So I have an example where worked in healthcare, BJC Healthcare in St. Louis. I met with our CFO, who said our biggest problem in our organization is length of stay. Even at the board room, we've got 2 C people that are bringing a number what we think our average length of stay for a patient is in our hospitals, and they're both different depending on what department is bringing that number. So finance and our clinical, who owns that definition, right? Who should be defining it? Who should be defining that term, right? And the funny thing is, regulatory body was already defining it in healthcare. So someone had asked earlier on this call, what is a data standard? Well, one of the standards ought to be, you ought to see if a regulatory body is already defining the term for you, and then maybe start there, right? And then maybe you have little differentiations in that definition. Maybe you want to be better than, right? So you might, but you want to understand what those little permutations are, and the difference between finance and clinical. Our denominator was completely different in both cases. Finance was including something they shouldn't have been, and our clinical team had adopted what CMS had given us, right, as a regulatory body. And so it was important to align and understand, oh, that's why our number is different. We now have a clear definition for what length of stay is, but that had plagued us with problems for years. So man, I feel like I go rambling, Brian. You got to cut me off.
No, that's a great example. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would say for me is the approach that I've taken is and we've talked about, I think Nate talked about it a while ago. Find a single use case where AI is going to make a measurable difference using the data you have. And again, it does not have to be the entire data estate. Pick a data set or two that are impactful from a data context standpoint to this AI application. Build that out, learn from it. Again, I'll go back to what we talked about earlier. I'd say use a platform, don't do a cobbled together thing across the board. Then templatize the approach for not only data quality, but context quality validation. Again, we talked about that it's not only the data quality side, it's what is the overall context, including data quality, that is leading to the output for this particular microgen AI app or agent-based workflow. Once you have that templatized, you have that approach down, you're probably going to have to iterate on that, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times I've found, then repeat, kind of the rinse and repeat for every subsequent use case. And I would say connect the data quality directly to those downstream business outcomes. And that will help to a great degree facilitate some of that organizational buy-in and kind of get things a little more on that standardization path for you. So those are some of the things that I would recommend from a pattern I have seen work.
George?
Yeah. So to add to that a little bit, I think measuring data quality is relatively straightforward if you go with the classic pillars, enforcing them, the standards, and also making sure it's adopted to some degree of consistency across departments or teams is harder. I think Nate highlighted one of his pain points, right? You need to have a collaborative approach. And I think technology has evolved to a point where it can automate a lot of these measurements and visibility, monitoring, and remediation also. So I would say 3 things, right? We all talk about collaborations, but that's mandatory. And having consistency with automation helps drive some of the collaboration also, and adopt a modern platform. These are the 3 things I would say.
John?
Yeah, I agree with the points the other panelists have made for sure. One thing that I think I can add that hasn't been said already, I think in terms of enforcing data quality standards, you need to throw people at it as well. The customers and clients that I have seen that get a lot of success and have a strong data governance strategy are the ones that create roles where it is people's job to go across their data estate and make sure that everything is consistent and any downstream data consumers understand where to go to get the data they need, what that data is going to do for them, and where it is strong and where it is weak. I think sometimes those people can be the first to get cut come layoff time because they're not the teams directly generating the value. They're the team enabling the team that's generating value. So they're one step removed, and it's hard to measure that kind of impact. But you look at enough organizations and you compare and contrast the teams that have that centralized data team and they're doing it well versus the teams that don't. You don't need a lot of people. It can be a small, 2 or 3 person team that can just drive tons of intrinsic value for your business that you wouldn't have if you had siloed organizations all solving different problems, trying to fight each other, drawing from the shared data resource.
Yeah, great points all around, and great discussion and very lively Q&A. So much appreciated to the audience. Want to thank everyone for joining us today. Great insights from all of our panelists. If you missed any of this webinar or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after the conclusion of the webinar if you refresh this page. And we'll also send out the recording on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So thank you again to our great partners at Snowplow, SAP, Revify, Informatica, and Fivetran for making this webinar possible. And we'll see all of you again next time. Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.